Spider-Man and mermaids are taking over these days. As a Christian, how should we feel about these Hollywood blockbusters? All that and more now on Cultivating Truth. What's going on, everyone? My name is Aaron Davis, and this is another episode of Cultivating Truth. This is a podcast for Christian creatives wanting to understand more worldview within art and media. Last week, I sat down with my friends D'Angelo Hicks and Josh Weber, and we walked through Francis Schaeffer's Age of Fragmentation from his docuseries, How Should We Then Live? Now, I have more discussions that we're going to play in future episodes from me sitting down with other guests and some of my friends and scholars and experts in the fields of arts and media. A number of times I'm going to sit down by myself and break down different things that are currently going on in the cultural climate within Christian arts and media. There's a number of issues that are currently going on that I would love to tackle and just help be a resource to anyone who may be challenged or wanting to think further about things that are going on within Christian movies, music, documentaries, things that maybe even be anti or against the Christian culture, and maybe how should we think about it. This is not meant to be a political podcast. Obviously, as a Christian, I believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, sufficient for teaching and reproof in my life as well as anyone else's life. And so that is my objective truth that I'm going to hold tight to. And I would encourage others to as well. I understand that not everyone has the same worldview as myself, but working within the church and schools and other institutions with Christian worldview, I find it very much a need for more creatives to have content on YouTube and podcasts. We're specifically talking about things that are going on from an artistic and creative standpoint within the Christian worldview and Christian bubble. We're not short by any means on secular thinking within arts and media. Most of our arts and media within the cultures are driven through secular, non-biblical leaders and teachers. And so what we want to be here is a resource for anyone looking to tackle on the same issues that we all care about and we all think through, but with a Christian worldview. I do not think that I'm anyone special, but if this can be of a resource for you, then I hope to help. Now, in this episode, it is titled Spider-Man and Mermaids because I want to take a step back and talk about two major blockbuster movies that many families are going out to see. And if you are in the Davis household, we go to movies all the time. We have a membership to Cinemark, and we are seeing a new movie what seems like every other week these days. And now that my boys are kind of that age where they can start going to movies and sitting through, it's one of their favorite things to do with my wife and I. They get the big bowl of popcorn, a slushie, and we make it an event. And obviously in this line of work, we are all about good stories and enjoying good cinema together as a family. And with that being said, two of these films, Disney's remake of The Little Mermaid and Sony's Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse, they have been taking storm and topping the box office over the last couple of weeks. And that's why we're taking this subject on in today's podcast. I love the movies. I go all the way back to whenever I was a child and Jurassic Park came out. Was completely blown away by the CGI and the realism of the dinosaurs, the classic Steven Spielberg storyline with amazing character arcs, and of course being mesmerized by the wonderful John Williams score that affected all of my emotions. I love big blockbuster movies, and my family loves big blockbuster movies, and I completely understand the tension that many families, especially families of faith, have nowadays with movies, with a Hollywood that's producing so much content that is contrary to our faith and to our biblical worldview. So I wanted to make this podcast to talk about two popular characters, popular subjects, superheroes and fantasy princesses. And I want to break these stories down a little bit, give the good, maybe give some bad, but more importantly, give some things for us to consider as we're walking through these stories with our families. So first, I want to start with The Little Mermaid. Overall, I thought it was fun. That's the word I keep going to, is it was fun. I enjoyed revisiting this classic story from my childhood. I remember The Little Mermaid was always one of my mom's favorite movies. And of course, as a rambunctious little boy, I would always say, "Oh, I don't like The Little Mermaid. It's for girls." And now seeing it with my daughter who thinks that she's a princess, we had a good time. We had a blast. Personally, I thought that the CGI lacked, especially seeing Avatar, The Way of Water. I thought that that was a much better film as far as CGI and where we should be with animation nowadays. But it was fine. It just continued to give me 2017 Beauty and the Beast vibes, and I thought that that lacked as well. Overall, though, it was a good time. The characters, it took me a minute as far as Sebastian goes and Aquafina as Scuttle. Daveed Diggs did a great job with Sebastian, but his look and Scuttle's look kind of threw me off a little bit, but I did really enjoy the voice acting. Don't even get me started on Halle Bailey. I thought she was a wonderful cast choice for the role of Ariel. I understand that some conservatives have been a little bit upset with casting choice, with race, and whether or not it was a political move or whatever anyone was thinking. Let me say, if put race aside, Halle Bailey is the best Ariel I think you're going to find. Her voice, her acting, her innocence and sweet nature. I think she did a fantastic job, and I loved her as Ariel, and we are for Halle Bailey as Ariel in our household. Into the Spiderverse. Growing up as a superhero lover, I wanted to be Spider-Man. Spider-Man was my all-time favorite hero. Still to this day is Spider-Man and then Batman. Spider-Man relates to the young, aspiring hero. Spider-Man's fantastic. I don't need to go on and on about how I think Spider-Man's fantastic, but as a lover of Peter Parker, I have enjoyed watching these Spider-Verse movies because I feel does a great job allowing older viewers like myself and those who grew up with the comic books, who fell in love with Peter Parker, to pass the mantle and pass the baton to Miles Morales and this next generation. Yes, it is different. No, it is not Peter Parker. They know that. They pay respect to that. Even in the movie, there is this peace and satisfaction whenever Peter shows up to give Miles wisdom. And as I've grown in my years and transitioning with Spider-Man from his teenage years to college years to married and adult life and paying bills to now seeing passing that baton on to the next generation, I think is beautiful. And it's inspiring for me as an older viewer. And I'm great with my kids watching Miles Morales and wanting to be just like him. I think that the animation was phenomenal. I cannot overstate how well I thought they did on animation for Across the Spider-Verse. It was beautiful. I was blown away that animation has came this far. I thought maybe we were done and what we were seeing with Disney was pretty much the best that we could get. And really Avatar, James Cameron and Avatar, and how hyper realistic it looks. I thought that that's where we were going with our realism and animation, but Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I think, takes it into another notch. The first one, Into the Spider-Verse, was fantastic as well. But this one with the watercolors and the emotional appeal, I mean, there's a lot of visual artists who took on a huge workload on this project, and I thought it was beautiful and fantastic. So with that being said, my family enjoyed both of these movies. We thought The Little Mermaid remake was fun, and my boys and my family thought that Across the Spider-Verse was fantastic, and we recommend them. We're going to watch them again, and we enjoyed it. So now, what are some things that we should consider when taking on movies such as Disney princesses or Marvel superheroes? What do we do and how should we think? So let me go ahead and give a disclaimer. In no way, shape, or form do I want us to live in fear. And I definitely do not want us to be anti art. As we stated in last week's episode, when we discussed the age of fragmentation, Josh Weber broke down that many Christians are fleeting and getting away from the arts because they want to run away from the world. And Christ calls us to be in the world, but not of the world. And being in the world means participating and engaging with the world, and participating and engaging and seeing what is going on, the stories that are being told, the art that is going on and impacting our cultures. And we know that arts and media impacts culture the heaviest. So therefore, I would argue that Christians must know what's going on in arts and media. And that means what's going on with the hit movies. We should have a good pulse on them. Now, with both of these movies, I think that we can look at them, understand them, not be fearful, but understand how to cautiously walk in discerning the information that we can intake and allowing us to have great conversations with our families and our children about how we can be better followers of Christ, and maybe things that happen in the movie that weren't necessarily wise. We understand that these movies are not based on biblical truth and biblical worldview, but there may be moral truths and moral justice that we can find in these movies. Now, what do I mean morals when watching movies? Well, any good story, and that goes for movies as well, if they are going to take on the natural literary device of a plot, there's typically a moral dilemma that is going on. For many characters, we see that maybe the hero of the story deals with jealousy, doubt, betrayal, or death, and they have some kind of problem going on. And they must face this moral dilemma in order to overcome this problem. And typically within the character story arc, they are going to find a more enriched version of themselves and typically a better version of themselves. For Simba in The Lion King, his moral dilemma was that he blames himself for his father's death and therefore isolates himself, and he must overcome his evil uncle Scar in order to take on the rightful place on the throne. This is a moral dilemma that he must overcome, and then once he achieves this victory, he can then become the individual and the person that he needs to be, the rightful king. This is a great understanding of what a moral dilemma would be. So with any good story, there must be a moral dilemma and there must be some type of problem that our characters are trying to solve. Now, growing up in the 90s, and many people who are watching grew up loving Disney's Renaissance movies. I'm talking Lion King, Aladdin, Mulan, Beauty and the Beast, and of course, The Little Mermaid. These are stories with a common thread, in that typically these movies that I grew up on would revolve around a rebellious young person, a rebellious teenager, such as Simba, Aladdin, Mulan, and Ariel. They were rebellious, and because they had some form of rebellion, something bad happened. And when that bad thing happened, they did make mistakes, but they eventually learned how to overcome those mistakes, and then all ends well. Growing up, I would take this on and I would think through, yeah, I'm going to make mistakes, but it's okay to be rebellious because as long as I'm being true to myself, like these characters that I was following, I'm in the right. Many people today still adopt to this worldview. This is not uncommon. You look at these stories and you understand that their stories is not necessarily about their mistakes, but their story is that they were right because they were being themselves. And sure, they had to grow. Sure, they had to learn a little bit, but ultimately because they were themselves, no matter what the cost, whether it was their family, friends, or their future, they made the right thing because it's what they wanted to do. A complete subjective moral dilemma that they take on themselves and are justified because of their own worldview of themselves and how they view themselves amongst others. Now, I love my Disney movies growing up. They got me through the days, and still to this day, I may be a Disney nerd. I love them. They are a part of my childhood, and I wouldn't be where I'm at today without having these fantastic stories in my life. So I am not anti-Disney and I'm not anti these stories, but I think it's really important for us to know what we are digesting. If we are taking this in and our media content is like food, we need to look at it like nutrition. I like to say to digest the meat and to spit out the bones. That's how we should take all of our media intake. We should not run away from things that are secular, but instead take the good things. So, for example, when I look at Aladdin, I don't think of Aladdin as the thief. I think of Aladdin as the one who learned a huge lesson. I think of Simba overcoming every doubt that he's ever faced in his life. I think of Mulan bringing honor to her family. These are great components and could be wonderful lessons for our families and our little ones. Now, likewise, there can also be bones and there can be junk in what we digest. So, for my generation, fellow millennials, I think millennials are very, very rebellious because we have been taught through media that it is okay as long as we speak. And if we can speak with a loud voice, then we should be heard, no matter what the cost is and no matter if we are right or wrong. Now, hear me out on this. I'm not saying that these stories are bad. What I'm saying is that if we take on the worldviews of being me focused or only caring about how I feel and how I think, no matter what the cost or what the repercussions are, I think that that can be very dangerous. And we see it in many, many movies today. Now, when I look at The Little Mermaid, I see a moral dilemma that Ariel is facing. She wants to do something that her dad is saying no to. She wants to go against her reality and be human and walk amongst the people. She wants to be where the people are, a part of their world. Her dad says no, and that's impossible because she's essentially a fish, a mermaid. Well, Ariel makes this deal. We know that deal. Spoilers. She gets hooked up with Ursula and pretty much sacrifices her father and her father's kingdom because of the poor decision that she made. The problem with understanding and looking Ariel as just a hero in these stories, I think can be very problematic with our worldviews. And what I mean by that is if we don't look at Ariel as, quite frankly, a foolish teenager, I think we really miss the mark in watching The Little Mermaid. Proverbs talks over and over again about not following the foolish, but instead following the wise. Ariel goes completely against wisdom in her narrative and causes all of these problems. And there is catastrophic issues that need to be resolved. Yes, she does clean them up and has her happy ending. But my fear and what I would want to say is to have caution for my children and anyone else who would be watching this is to understand that Ariel made big, big mistakes. That's how we should view this. We should not view Ariel as this brilliant person. I'm not saying she's dumb, not saying she's idiotic, but she made foolish choices. And we need to understand that. And yes, her story ended up being okay, but not every story ends up being okay. It is not wise to follow through the same action steps that Ariel followed, disobeying our families, going against the world and order. These things can be very, very foolish. Likewise, across the Spiderverse goes through similar perils. Spoilers ahead. If you desire to watch the recent Spider-Man movie, I would encourage you to revisit this podcast when you are done. But essentially, Miles is faced with a moral dilemma and a problem, and he is trying to figure out what he is going to do. The problem is that his problem could result in the collapse of the multiverse. Now, if you're familiar with the multiverse, Marvel has been on this, DC and Batman, Superman, superheroes are now getting involved with this. And it seems that more and more storylines are going for this alternate reality and different version of themselves. And so Spider-Man, Miles Morales, is no different here. He has a huge problem that he is about to face, but he wants to save his loved ones. Now, anyone watching this would understand Miles' problem. Knowing that your loved one is going to die, you would want to save them. Now, that is the good thing that I think that we can get from watching movies is that we can sit back and understand who would we sacrifice for in order to save. Now, the problem comes from this whole ideal of the universe and multiverse for Miles. And when I was watching this, I could not help but think Miles is rebuking every other version of himself, every other Spider-Man disagreeing with him, saying that he is going to cause a problem. The wise are giving him and announcing to him this huge issue that he is about to face. And quoting Miles, he says very famously now, nah, I'm going to do it my own way. I have heard young men and women quoting that verse as a mantra. And this is what I'm saying, going back to my childhood with Disney, is this sense of rebelliousness against the wise. Now, we paid good money to go see Spider-Man. We know that Spider-Man is our hero and he is going to be just and he is going to be good. And yes, he's going to make sloppy, nasty mistakes, but we know in the end, he is going to win. Yes. But that framework and that seed going into our innocent brains without allowing ourselves to do much critical thinking can be very, very dangerous. And that's what I want to say for families, is to be cautious, to understand that we should listen to those who know better. We should listen to those who are wise and the experts in this field. Now, I am sure that everyone's going to come around to it and say, yeah, Miles, you were right and you were awesome. And we should have listened to you from the very beginning. I'm sure the third one is going to resolve beautifully and it's going to be a fun story. And myself and my kids are going to enjoy it. But once again, be very, very cautious with that. Does that mean that we should always rebel against authority? We should always rebel against what we think or know that we should do? Let me read you this quote from Brett McCracken from the Gospel Coalition discussing this recent Little Mermaid film. This no limits approach to identity has been Disney's siren song for decades, beckoning young viewers to embrace their inner selves even when they conflict with outer dynamics like family expectations and traditional moral norms. It's a mantra that pitches empowerment and freedom, but ultimately shackles young people within the prison of unreliable and oft dangerous desires. Now, I read that quote because I think McCracken is spot on here. And this is why we should be cautious when watching these films and digesting these stories, is that yes, there is a hero here, and this hero is going to do good and they are going to succeed and win. And it reminds us of the gospel story that Jesus came and defying all odds, he comes to die for us, offering us salvation, and we win in the end because he wins, completely defeating death. This is the best and greatest story. And so many stories are off of this story. The sense of heroism and self-sacrifice is completely beautiful. Well, now we see in a lot of our stories, the moral responsibility is on the young hero, the young teenager who is quite frankly foolish. And although they make mistakes, they tidy them up in a way that is very unrealistic. So, for example, in Across the Spiderverse, once again, thought it was a fantastic movie. But Miles is going against thousands, if not millions, of other versions of himself, rejecting his thoughts, rejecting his plans. And Miles says, nah, I'm going to do it my own way. That's not wise. Now, maybe any one of us would do exactly what Miles is about to do. But the problem goes into the young viewer. If they take that in, their hearing doesn't matter what our parents say, does not matter what my own moral code might say, doesn't matter what my family, my church, authority, police officers, whoever, they have to say, I'm going to do it my own way. Be very, very cautious with these stories, especially with all of these alternate reality stories. They're becoming more and more popular. And I can't help but think, with everything going on in our current cultural climate, with my truth is my truth and your truth is your truth, to where now we have these different variants and these different universes of these characters. I've openly heard teenagers talk about what their variant in another universe would be like. I want to give an example of my son. He's 4 and he's the actor of our family. Ollie loves his characters. When he dresses up like Captain America, you cannot call him Ollie. You will call him Steve Rogers because he will refuse to answer you. And he takes on the voice, he takes on the posture, and really embraces the role. We love it as parents. We think it's adorable. Well, he has another version of himself, another version in the multiverse. And that is a dog persona that he takes on, and his name is Scooter. It is absolutely hilarious. Ollie will get on the ground and he will only bark. And if you talk to him with your human words, he will not respond to you except occasionally breaking character to inform you that dogs cannot speak English and that they cannot talk. This is so funny. Thing is, though, is that my son is 4 and he has a wild imagination. And I want to encourage him to have an imagination, but I do need him to know that he is Ollie Davis and that he is, in fact, not a dog named Scooter. I watched him come from the womb. Trust me, he's not a dog. Even if he thinks he's a dog, he is not a dog. And we live in a worldview that is making everyone's truth subjective and up for grabs. This is where I think we need to be extremely cautious when going through these stories of different variants, multiverses, alternate realities of ourselves, and fighting against what people, the authority in our lives, and those things that are organized and constructed in order to serve us. If we grow up thinking that these things are bad and the only thing that matters is how I feel and the reality that I'm living in, well, it's going to be just like these stories that we're listening to, and it's going to cause cataclysmic problems in our lives and in others' lives. It's dangerous. It's flat out dangerous, and we need to be cautious of it. I'm going to continue to watch the Disney movies that are coming up as long as we continue to think that they are appropriate, and I don't think that all of them have been appropriate. And we're going to continue to watch the superhero movies likewise. But I'm going to also continue having these conversations with my kids, and I want to encourage you as a lover of the movies and as a lover of arts and media to not just run away from secular music and secular films, but to instead listen to them, watch them, digest the meat, digest the good, man, the good things that Miles is about to do, the love that Ariel has, even if it's only for just a few days for Prince Eric. There can be great things that we can find in these stories, but we want to also make sure that the problems in these universes are put into check and that we are not bringing them into the one real universe, our reality. These stories are fictional and they were made up in someone else's imagination, and they can be fun, they can be life-giving, they can be entertaining, but we do not want them to be dangerous to our worldview. And I want to encourage anyone here as we are trying to cultivate truth. Cultivating truth means understanding the culture and trying to integrate truth within the culture. And the only way we're going to do that is if we have more amazing creators, people who are pushing animation, people who are pushing storytelling, people who are creating great movies, great music, and great artwork to give what I would say is the best and most amazing form of artwork. And that is artwork that is glorifying Christ. Artwork that is honoring God, and that might be directly, explicitly, or indirectly and inexplicitly. And what I mean by that is that it is okay for stories to not be explicitly gospel-centered. I naturally think of The Lord of the Rings, an amazing, all-time great story that impacted the world when it came out with J.R.R. Tolkien. I think of the art that came after The Lord of the Rings that was inspired by this Christian phenomenal artwork. I think of Led Zeppelin 4, which many people would say is the greatest rock album ever. And Led Zeppelin's known as being the fathers of metal. And you have a secular band who was inspired by a piece of Christian artwork. And it was beautiful. And yes, it was not completely directly about Christ, but we see Christian elements of redemption and the return of the King and self-sacrifice and evil being destroyed. These are good things. And I think that we should continue to look for these good things when we're going through our art. Thank you for listening. I would like to encourage you to continue to listen and follow us on social media. Hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you next week. I am Aaron Davis, and this has been Cultivating Truth.